A boy must go through specific stages of development in order to become a complete man. And this is something that we've largely forgotten about in our culture. A lot of men, I would even say the vast majority of men nowadays, are stuck in their development. And this is what causes a lot of dissatisfaction and frustration and suffering. This situation of being stuck in boyhood, being stuck in early stages of development, and being unable to follow the path that would make you a complete man is also closely tied to a lot of the mental health problems we're seeing and a lot of the addiction to various sources of cheap dopamine. So today, let me explain the stages of development. And this is based on Alison Armstrong's work called The Amazing Development of Men, which is a beautiful depiction of how men develop and one of the best ones I've ever come across. So based on her work, let me lay out the 4 stages of development and what they mean for you. The 4 stages are called page, knight, prince, and king. So let's get right into it, starting with the page. So the page is an aspiring knight. The page is a young boy who looks towards the knights and wants to be like them. Except that he's also still figuring out the very basics of life. This is when you're a young boy and you're still learning how to tie your own shoes and how to run without tripping over your own feet and all this kind of stuff. So you want to be a knight, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment, but you're basically still figuring out the very basics of how to find your way around the world and so on. So that is the first stage as a very young boy. That's where you're at. And since it's basically all about wanting to be a knight, let's go straight into that stage of development. The knight is where you get interested in adventure and fun. On the surface, it looks like it's all just about adventure and fun and essentially entertaining yourself. However, under the surface, there's a lot more going on. The kind of adventure that you seek as a knight in this stage of boyhood is a form of play that is really meant to prepare you for the world and sharpen your skills. So this is exactly what we see in animals when they play. We know that among animals, play is essentially a way to sharpen skills and develop skills needed for survival. So for example, if you look at kittens playing, they're like play fighting and pouncing on each other and sneaking up on each other. And it's all playful, but in all of these activities, the kittens are learning the important skills that they will later need in order to be able to successfully hunt and feed themselves. And this is exactly what's going on with the knight's search for adventure as well. You are seeking adventure in a way where you are trying to test yourself. You're trying to find out what you're made of. You want to know how far you can push things. You want to try new things and take risks and see how much you can take and how far you can go. And here you're also seeking freedom. Like you want to be able to do your own thing without the supervision of parents or adults. And you are really doing activities that are there to both test and also develop your capability and your strength. Knights are drawn to adventure where they can learn their physical skills and test their physical skills and physical challenges and things like that. But also knights are drawn to the kind of play where, for example, they can test out their leadership skills. So a group of boys come together and they go on some adventure together. And at different stages of the adventure, one or the other of them will have to take the lead or they'll have to make decisions. They maybe come to a place where it's like, oh, how do we come from here to there? How do we cross this river? And now it's about decision-making skills and leadership skills and negotiation skills. And it's also about teamwork. An example from my own childhood is that during this phase, one of the things I would do quite often is I would go wild camping with a couple of friends, and we would essentially go on more and more adventurous versions of overnight camping, usually in the woods somewhere. And we do it like in the deep of winter. We do it without tents and without anything. So we'd have to make a fire in order to make it through the night and maintain that fire and things like that. So this is an example of the kind of adventure I was drawn to doing, which involves a lot of stuff. It's like, planning, where do we go, getting on the bicycle, getting there, the physical skill of getting there, the physical challenge of the journey itself, and then the challenge of the camping and the making it through the cold night and all this kind of stuff, which of course, again, also has this kind of teamwork aspect. You're doing it in a group and it's literal survival skills. And this also applies to many other things. This kind of fun seeking, adventure seeking. It can also be the phase where, you want to go out with your friends, you want to go to parties, you want to experience new things all the time. But all of this has this aspect of play and challenge and exploration. The next phase is the phase of the prince. And this is marked by often becoming somewhat obsessed with making something of yourself and with creating something that is more lasting. So in the night phase, it's just like, hey, let's do this fun thing, but it doesn't lead to anything. It's just, let's do this adventure, let's try this challenge, let's see what happens, but you're not building anything. In the prince phase, you are starting to build things. You're still seeking challenge and you're still trying to find out what you're made of, but now in a way that actually creates something of value. So this is usually centered on career or business or something creative. So in the prince phase, you might be totally focused on your career, on achieving whatever qualifications you need in order to land that dream job, get that promotion, make more money, and have enough resources to get your own place, for example. Or it could be focused on entrepreneurship, on learning all the skills you need and making something happen, building your own business, where again, you have a goal of you want to achieve something that has a lasting effect and that gives you the resources to be able to have your own place and to be able to, in the future, take care of a family. And it can also be something like, taking your music seriously and trying to make it as an artist, or taking your sport seriously and trying to make it as an athlete. In my own life, my first go through the prince phase was all focused on martial arts. I advanced through the martial arts system that I was training within, basically all the way to the end. I completed the final test. And I got to the point where I would have been qualified to be an instructor and, start my own school if that's what I'd wanted to do. That's not what I ended up doing. I ended up having a second go at the prince phase that was totally focused on entrepreneurship and building my own business. And this, by the way, is common, that you don't only have one go at the prince phase. The way this works is that you will take a stab at something. Like I said, it might be career or business or making it as an artist or something like that. You take a stab at making something of yourself and you come to the end of that part of the prince phase and go through the tunnel. There's usually a crisis of some kind. And the crisis can be that either you tried really hard to make something happen and you have to accept failure. You have to get to the point where you maybe, okay, I just don't have what it takes to be a pro athlete, for example. So you have to essentially accept failure and then decide, what do I do next? What's the next thing I try to do? And that can take a while. So this can be weeks or months even of crisis and disorientation before you then figure out, okay, here's the next thing I'm going to try. The crisis can also happen when you have accomplished what you thought you wanted to accomplish. So maybe you followed a career path and you've made it, you got your degree, you got the job, but now that you have it, you're like, I don't actually like this. This is actually not what I want to do. And then the crisis is, what should I do? Do I keep just doing stuff I'm not passionate about, that doesn't feel aligned with myself, with my values, just to make money? Or do I start again? Do I try something different? So it's not uncommon to have several attempts, to have basically several runs through the prince phase and come to that crisis before you're ready to become the king. So in my example, like I said, my first go was essentially creating a career in martial arts as a martial arts instructor. And I got to the point where I could have essentially accomplished what I set out to do, but I realized this is no longer aligned with what I really wanted. And there were various reasons for me to basically go, okay, this is not it, and then go back and essentially restart the prince phase and do it with entrepreneurship the second time around. And in case you're wondering, I have absolutely no regrets about this. Going through the prince phase multiple times is not a mistake. It is not, you're not doing it wrong if you don't go from prince to king after your very first attempt. In my case, it was a very valuable learning experience that I still benefit from to this day. So I really don't see it as a mistake or a failure. It was really good for me to do this thing, have like this martial arts career, stop it before it turned into anything, and then do something else. It was the right decision. Now, in any case, at the end of the prince phase, there is going to be a period of crisis of some sort, even if you transition to becoming the king, because still you have to let go of a law and you have to go through that transition, it can be unpleasant even if you are successfully transitioning from prince to king this time around. Now, the king, this is the stage where you have your kingdom, you have built something for yourself, you have established yourself. You're no longer so much trying to find out, who am I? What am I made of? What am I supposed to do in this world? You've kind of answered those questions and you have built things, and your focus is now much less about you and it's much more about other people. An example of this is that you have your career or your business, you have a stable source of income, you have your own place, and you're starting a family. And now all of this stuff is no longer about, okay, how can I succeed? How much money can I make? How can I prove myself? It's more like, how can I provide for my family? How can I keep doing what I'm good at? And how can I be a good leader and help my kids thrive and grow up into healthy adults, for example? It's this kind of focus on outwards. What can I do for my family? What can I do for my community? How can I use all these skills and all this power that I've gained through my development in the phases so far? How can I use all of this to benefit others? So those are the 4 stages of development that ideally, as a boy, you go through to become a complete man. Page, knight, prince, and king. So let's talk about what this means for you and what you can do with this knowledge, with this insight about the stages of development. The first thing to understand about this is that healthy development goes through all of these stages. The goal is not to get to the king stage as quickly as possible, to skip past, the early stages and achieve the king stage right away. That would not be healthy development, and it wouldn't work anyway. None of the stages are better or worse than any of the others. You're not doing a better job if you move through the stages more quickly. However, getting stuck in a stage of development does cause a lot of problems and frustration. So it's one thing to be actually moving through a stage and perhaps even with the prince stage going through it several times, but you're moving, things are happening, you're still developing. It's another thing to just be stuck and not developing at all. That causes a lot of problems. And unfortunately, we live in a world where a lot of guys are denied a healthy passage through these stages. Pages and knights often experience a lot of shaming and pushback for their natural impulses. Many boys are denied their drive for adventure. They're not allowed to have their own freedom. They're not given the kind of freedom from adult supervision that they really crave. They are basically being boxed in because their parents are too scared, for example. And they're also shamed for these masculine impulses. And this is something I experienced as well, where implicitly and sometimes explicitly, I was always told to be less of a boy, essentially. The impression I was given is I would be better if I were essentially more like a girl, which is to say, don't be so loud, don't take risks, don't be aggressive, don't be competitive. Why can't you just be quiet and nice and play with the dolls like the girls? The implication was, in a way, that the girls are doing it right and the girls are doing it more acceptably, and that my deviations from girl-like behavior were a flaw that, it would be good if I could correct this problem. Again, the problem of why am I so loud and competitive, and why do I always want to run around and take risks and climb things when I could fall down and get hurt, and why am I interested in weapons and fighting, and all of this is somehow bad and would be better if I didn't do that. But no matter what messages we get or how much people are trying to restrict us, we do have this innate masculine drive to go through these stages of development. And so in the worst case, we just seek substitutes. And this explains a lot of the addiction to screens and substances and other sources of cheap dopamine that especially young men are being affected by to a huge extent. For example, video games are a substitute. It gives you the illusion of a digital adventure as a substitute to the real adventure that you're driven to go and have. You have your group chat with the boys, your Discord server where you hang out with other kids, instead of having an actual group of people that you go on adventures on. This would have been, in our tribal past, this would have been like your hunting party, right? You would have had a hunting party of guys you go on adventures with and do stuff with and measure yourself against the world with. And now that has been kind of replaced. You're not allowed to do that You're not allowed to do the risky things in the real world. So now, you have the group chat and maybe you play video games together. And of course, instead of the adventure and the challenge of going out and learning how to seduce women, how to interact with women, and having, this is also part of the drive as a knight, having the adventure of exploring sexuality and romance and maybe having some variety, trying things out. That is typical in the knight phase. But instead of having that, you have a substitute, which is Instagram models that are scantily clad, OnlyFans, porn, and so on. Because of these circumstances, many men these days are eternal pages. They are always looking at other men being knights. And this is, your social media influencer who lives the super adventurous life that you wish you had. It is the movie star, in movies and shows. You watch other men go on adventures and take the risk and win the day. You watch other men in sports, for example. You watch the athletes going out there, being amazing, doing cool stuff, risking, winning. You watch them, and it's like, as a substitute for you doing it, you're watching other people do it, or you are pseudo-embodying it by playing video games where you can kind of pretend like you're on an adventure, but there's no actual risk involved or anything like that. So you are constantly in this watching perspective. You are watching other people do what you wish you could do and what you are driven to do, but you're never stepping into that fully and doing it yourself. And what's worse is that all of this stuff, these video games, the porn, the movies, everything is designed to be super addictive and engaging. It's designed to hook into your brain and keep you consuming more and more and more. And all this basically means that you get stuck in that early stage of development. And over time, this causes massive dissatisfaction. Look, this is why no matter how much of this stuff you consume, no matter how comfortable your life is, and how free you are to spend hours and hours every day doing all of these stimulating and fun things, it always feels like something's missing. It always feels like, in a way, it keeps getting worse, right? The dissatisfaction, the something's just not right here feeling keeps getting worse and worse, and it can turn into a full-blown depression. And really, this is your system telling you, this ain't the real thing. You got to do the real thing. There's like a force inside you that's trying to push you through the healthy stages of development. And if the circumstances you're in are pushing against that and not allowing it to happen, it keeps getting worse until something breaks. So this is how it goes wrong, I think, for a lot of people very early in the development. It also goes wrong later on if you make it into the prince stage. And you can also be like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, by the way, right? You might not have ever completed the knight stage properly, but now still you're doing some prince stuff. That is absolutely possible. And here, many limitations are placed on us as well. So for example, what a lot of people experience is that, yes, it's good for you to, be ambitious and try to make something of yourself, but only in very narrow, like approved rails, right? So yes, if you want to be academically successful and get into like a high prestige, high paying field, you want to become a doctor or a lawyer or something, yes, that's fine. That's allowed and encouraged. But anything else, you want to make it as an artist? No, it's too risky, it's too likely to fail. It's not a real job. Don't do that. You get shamed for that, right? And what's the problem with this is that you can end up, doing all the right things, essentially being a good boy, trying to please your parents, trying to do what society expects of you. And you go into that high paying field or whatever, only to find out that you really don't want to do this. You just really aren't aligned with this at all, which then means eventually you either, put up with the dissatisfaction and try to medicate yourself out of noticing how unsatisfied you are, which again explains a lot, right? If you look at how much medication is going around these days, like why are people constantly numbing themselves? Well, this might explain it, right? If you've been forced down a path that just isn't right for you, then you have to do something about the dissonance you feel about this. The other thing that I think goes missing here is that I think for most men, it'd be much better to be allowed to attempt whatever the thing is they want to attempt and potentially fail at it. So yeah, you want to make it as an artist? Sure, there's like a 99.99% failure rate there. But give it a try. Give it a try while you're young and really put yourself fully into it. and then fail at it, but at least you've tried, and then you go do something else. That's actually a much better way to do it than trying to avoid that failure altogether. Failure is part of the game, and especially for men, I think trying to avoid failure is a terrible idea. What you should do is make loads and loads of attempts and be okay with the fact that many of them are going to fail and some of them are going to succeed. Like I mentioned before, for me, the kind of martial arts career that I started when I was young was essentially a failed attempt. But what was really good about it for me was that I was allowed to take it as far as I wanted. And then I realized this isn't for me and I let it go. If I had been forced to let go of it, if basically before I took it as far as I wanted to, I would have somehow by my parents or whatever been forced to abort this project and go into, a serious career or whatever, I probably would still be carrying that around with me. I'd probably still be stuck there in many ways. So that's why I say I think it's much better to give it the attempt, give it your all, and fail at it, and then move on to the next thing. And then finally, the king stage. What goes wrong here? Well, what goes wrong is that most men just don't make it here, right? The vast majority of men do not make it into the king stage because they get stuck much earlier in the process. One thing I see here is that, especially in the context of relationships, there's a lot of pushing people or expecting like, oh, you're supposed to be a king. Especially like when it comes to dating and relationships, in the last couple of years, there's been kind of a pivot to traditional values again, especially in some corners of the internet. That's admirable. It's admirable to say, okay, as the guy, the goal is find a good wife and start a family and, be the leader and the provider in that family. These are very admirable goals. However, if you're like 18, expecting that that's who you're going to be is just not realistic. How are you supposed to be all that? You cannot just ask someone to be a king. You can't just be like, okay, you're in this relationship now be a king. That's not how it works. You can't also ask that of yourself. And the worst thing is if you simply try to pretend to be a king without going through the stages of development that make you a king. That is destined to fail. So this is something that I see going wrong here. There's a lot of almost like finger wagging. It's like, well, you ought to be a king. You should be this. Instead of going, well, if I want you to be a king, what I should do is allow you and encourage you to go through the stages of development. That's how you become a king. So that is an overview of the 4 stages of development as laid out by Alison Armstrong in her work and where it goes wrong from what I can see through the work I've been doing. As you're hearing about these stages, can you see yourself in this development? In which stage do you feel like you currently are? Ideally, what you can do is recognize where you are in this process and allow the stages to unfold. Allow yourself to go through these stages instead of trying to skip past one of them. Especially if you're thinking that, well, I want to get to the king stage as soon as possible, I think it's very important to realize that the fastest way to get there is to go through all of the stages. And another thing you can practically do with this idea of the stages of development is you can look for the signs of dissatisfaction in your own life and see how they fit with this model. I think that signs of dissatisfaction where, it could be depression, but could also be milder than that. It can be just like feeling like something's not right, feeling like you're not quite living your own life, just feeling like this kind of dissatisfaction and dissonance. Maybe also a feeling of directionlessness, meaninglessness, this kind of thing. You can take that, notice this dissatisfaction, and ask yourself, could it be that I'm feeling this dissatisfaction because I'm stuck in my development somewhere? And what is the next stage for me to go? Like, if you're stuck in page mode, then you're feeling all this dissatisfaction. The next stage, like the way to get unstuck, is to allow yourself to become a knight. Allow yourself to give in to that call to adventure and do it for real. Don't just do the substitute that kind of tricks you temporarily into feeling like, oh yeah, here I am on an adventure, when really you're not. You're just sitting in front of a screen clicking buttons. And finally, this is also something you can see in other people. And sometimes it can be really good to see this in someone else and encourage someone else's development before you can see it more clearly in yourself. So if you have younger siblings, younger peers, or also older people around you, if you can kind of start watching, okay, what stage of development is this man in? And do you see them moving through stages? Do you see maybe they're stuck somewhere. And especially with younger siblings, younger peers, younger relatives, for example, if you can help them see where they're at and help them kind of usher them through the stages of development, or help them allow to the unfolding of the development to happen, often helping someone else is a great way to get the same thing for you. So maybe for you, it's harder to see your own stuckness in development in yourself, but maybe you see it in your little brother, and you can see if you can kind of help him. In doing that, you might suddenly realize, oh, this is where I'm stuck. This is what I need to do next. So that's one way, again, in which you can use this model of development in order to help others and help yourself. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the Quit by Healing podcast and the Quit by Healing YouTube channel. What I talk about is closely related to helping men go through these stages of development. I talk a lot about how to overcome porn addiction and phone addiction and cheap dopamine addiction. Because like I said, that is what's keeping you stuck. That is the substitute, the fake thing that's keeping you stuck in your development, and that's keeping you from becoming a real man. So learning to overcome that is one of the ways in which to progress and move forward. So check out the first link in the description. That's where you can find links to all of the Quit by Healing related material. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, I would love for you to leave a rating, leave a review, leave a comment. Engaging with the material is a great way to signal to the algorithms that they show this to more people. And my goal is to help as many men as possible. So you can help me do that by leaving a rating and engaging with this content, getting the algorithm to spread the word for us. So I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. That's all for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.